In this module, we'll define collaboration, collaborative planning, co-management, and collaborative learning. We'll discuss some of the key aspects of the collaborative process. We'll look at why there's been a surge in natural resource collaborative groups in recent years and describe some of the benefits and drawbacks of collaboration. We'll also look at some issues that Native Americans have identified as needing special attention when approaching collaboration. This will help inform our discussions on Indigenous peoples and natural resource collaboration. Collaboration is defined as a process of joint decision-making among key stakeholders, or a process that includes individuals that represent a range of interests and views who come together to meet the goals of all of the group members. Collaboration is often something that occurs on public lands where there is more than one key stakeholder. It might also occur amongst private landowners or a combination of public and private landowners when they are managing for something that crosses property boundaries. A community-based collaborative is a multi-stakeholder group that's convened voluntarily from within the local community to focus on resource management or planning. The diverse group is brought together to work towards a shared vision for their communities and landscapes that can influence the use and protection of resources through either recommendations or direct action or both. Collaboratives use decision-making processes that require the participation of local stakeholders, so they engage in consensus-based decision-making. This occurs when you bring a group together to discuss the issue and come up collectively with a decision on how they'll proceed. So for the rest of this discussion, you might think of the last time you might have been engaged in some collaborative decision making. So think of the last time you were, as a member of a group, coming together on a decision. It could have been where to go, which movie to see, or how to approach a certain project at work. And think about the interactions that you witnessed and experienced as you were a member of that group and going through that process. Since the rise of the nation-state system of government, most land in state systems is held publicly or privately. There's very little land that's held communally in these types of governments. In some Indigenous communities, there are still examples of land that's held and managed communally. In global cultures, because there is so little communal land, collaboration most commonly occurs on publicly held lands. So in the United States, that would be on federal lands. Public involvement in decision-making on public lands can take many forms, and one of the defining characteristics is that the participating parties have different amounts of power to affect the outcome in these different ways of public involved decision-making. At one end of the spectrum, agency personnel will make decisions at their own discretion. The public might have some say in who is hired to those agency decision-making positions, especially if they're elected positions. Likewise, the agency may solicit public opinion with scoping sessions that might inform agency decisions. But ultimately, the federal agents are not required to act on public sentiment. So this would be total agency discretion. This is not an example of collaboration. Collaboration occurs when multiple stakeholders are included in the decision making. With collaborative planning, agency personnel and stakeholders arrive at decisions jointly, but it's the agency alone that has the power to enforce the decision. So the decision is made jointly, but in terms of implementing the decision, that's up to the agency. With co-management, the public is involved in both the decision-making and in enacting the decisions. So they're deciding together and they're acting together. So those are two different ends of collaboration, and you can see they vary based on how much power the public has in the process. Instances when the public has complete control are described as community ownership and management. This might occur in community-held property wherein all members of the public participate in decision-making. Can you think of any examples of community ownership and management, either ones that you might have witnessed, participated in, or perhaps just read about? Collaboration is described as a process for discovering or building shared values, goals, and visions. Collaboration necessarily involves lengthy discussions and joint fact-finding. During the process, members of the collaborative effort each bring their own insights and viewpoints on the issue to the table, as well as their own knowledge sources. They also, of course, bring their own biases and their own preconceived notions. Through this process of meeting and collectively discussing the issue, collaborative learning occurs. Collaborative decision-making is a process that can take unexpected twists and turns as new information is discovered. It is necessarily a flexible process and does not lend itself to a tight timeline. So collaboration, above all else, often takes a lot of time and a lot of dedication on the part of the participants. I was involved in one collaborative group on the western slope of Colorado, and this was the property in question belonged to the BLM, and they were seeking input on all of those who felt they had an interest in the BLM land. So there were lots of folks who were diehard birders. There were people who were off-road vehicle users. There were ranchers who had allotments on the land. There were environmentalists. All of these different people came together to meet and discuss their very strong feelings for how the land should be managed on their own time, often driving sometimes an hour both ways to get to the meeting. And the meetings were usually held on a Friday night. So, and they did this for years, literally for years. They met several Fridays a month, driving, talking with people that they didn't at the outset feel that they had anything in common with. So you can see that collaboration is not something really to be entered into lightly. It takes dedication. It really is a commitment. Despite the requirements of time and personal time often, collaborative efforts in natural resource management have increased over the past 30 years, and quite a lot in the United States as well. And this has been in response to social and political conflict. In the 1970s, increasing societal diversity, coupled with a heightened environmental awareness and an increase in indigenous rights movements, created a society whose diverse values were not being addressed by the narrow objectives of command and control management practices. The public began to distrust agency practices that failed to account for the public's evolving environmental values and diversity. Collaborative efforts have emerged from various arenas, including local organic and grassroots efforts, government organizations, both state and federal, and non-governmental organizations and foundations. All of these entities have been drawn to collaborative efforts and started experimenting with them. Collaborative natural resource management is a concept that's been recognized as a means to reduce conflict among stakeholders, to build social capital, and ultimately to produce better, more lasting decisions. In the past 30 years or so, collaboration has been considered a remedy to the failure of the technocratic approach to land management. The technocratic approach describes the process whereby technical experts are in charge of decision making, or are the sole informants of the decision makers. This approach often employs decision makers in faraway places. So for example, a decision maker from Washington, D.C., who's a recognized expert on a certain topic might be making decisions for some public land that is in the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. These decision makers from faraway places aren't going to be aware of the on-the-ground realities for local resource users, or they might downplay and ignore them. In addition, technical and scientific experts are frequently not interdisciplinary and may fail to understand the complexities involved in balancing the social, economic, and ecological factors surrounding natural resource management. So in other words, they may not be versed in the triple bottom line that we used in our definition of sustainability. Competing values and competing knowledges and truths among resource users have also contributed to the rise in collaboration as a means of reconciling these differing perspectives and a way to reach decisions that could be more agreeable to all. Planning is also enhanced when multiple viewpoints are represented that might highlight some of the issues of scale that might make a management practice unacceptable to a portion of the population. Finally, including all stakeholders in decision-making helps create flexible decisions that it can adjust to the complexity and uncertainty that are inherent in ecological, social, and economic systems. Collaboration can increase knowledge and understanding of all components of the triple bottom line, including the economic, social, and ecological components by bringing together the full suite of resource users and managers to share existing information and incorporate diverse knowledge sources, to engage in joint research and fact-finding to reduce the uncertainty and develop a common understanding of the issues and potential solutions involved, and to better reflect local values and uses. You can see today how diverse things have become, and we have facts and alternate facts. And this really speaks, I feel, to how the process of joint fact-finding can really bring a group together and reduce uncertainty. If you're all involved in deciding what the questions are, collecting the data, and analyzing it, there's going to be less for you to dispute than if you each bring your own knowledge sources and say that they're right. By cooperating in seeking solutions to common problems and resolving disputes, more effective decisions can be made. Only if all of the concerns surrounding a resource management issue are acknowledged and discussed can a solution be developed that addresses each of those issues. Decisions that acknowledge and address all of the problems are less likely to be derailed by unintended consequences. Additionally, these decisions are more likely to have the support of the resource users, which translates into greater compliance with the rules. Research has found that when the local population does not support a management decision, it will usually not be successful, regardless of how many scientific experts were involved in the planning and execution. This has been shown repeatedly with conservation efforts. It is almost impossible to operate a successful conservation effort without the support of the local population. Collaboration can also help to accomplish management tasks by pulling together resources and by coordinating efforts. When the economy takes a downturn or when the party in power shifts, natural resource funding for management and monitoring often becomes scarce. In the United States, many government management agencies are stretching their capabilities by sharing management responsibilities with citizens and user groups and taking advantage of the resources that these individuals either possess or have access to. Such resources might include things like equipment, expertise, access to citizen groups, or even the ability to distribute information and inform. Capacity is used to describe a wide range of capabilities, knowledge, and resources that groups and individuals need in order to be effective. Collaboration is also thought to develop community, agency, and organizational capacity by building trust and strengthening relationships within communities. Trust and relationships are key to increasing capacities because through relationships, groups and individuals have access to more expertise and to more resources. Other capacities collaborative efforts can strengthen include staff skills and capabilities, community development initiatives, and collaborative decision-making. There can be many barriers that prevent collaborative groups from forming or from persisting. So we've talked about many of the benefits of collaboration, and now we're going to look at some of the challenges that occur with collaboration. These include institutional and organizational barriers, such as lack of opportunities and incentives for collaborative efforts, inflexible policies and procedures, a lack of agency or organizational commitment, conflicting goals and missions, and limited resources. In fact, most collaborative groups struggle with limited resources. That's one of the very common struggles to collaboration. Problems with the collaborative process itself can also inhibit collaboration. These include an unfamiliarity with the process on the part of the participants, a lack of skills needed to collaborate successfully, tension between the collaborative process and the rest of the world. So the rest of the world has a lot of demands, as will the collaborative process. And power disparities between group members that are too great to bridge. So if you bring together a diverse set of stakeholders, but there's such a power imbalance that some feel afraid to share or to participate honestly in the discussion, that will be a barrier to collaboration. Attitudes and perceptions can also be a barrier to collaboration. This can include mistrust of collaboration in general, and there are many collaborative groups that are collaborative in name only, signaling that mistrust is probably warranted. In developing countries especially, collaborative groups have convened to manage for human and wildlife values and often include the term collaborative simply for funding purposes. So oftentimes the local population has very little opportunity to affect decisions or management outcomes, but the organization, understanding that collaboration are both buzzwords, might include that in the title simply to secure outside funding, but with no intention of actually being collaborative and including local interests. There might also be group attitudes that prevent collaboration. These attitudes might stem from any side and include things such as assumptions of inferiority. So for example, assuming that a part of the group is racially or socially inferior, or assumptions that one party is unwilling to listen or will not act in good faith. So a lack of trust. Organizational norms and culture can also inhibit collaboration. Some cultures do not speak their thoughts directly, but instead express them in subtle ways, and those outside the culture might miss these ways of communicating. Cultures or organizations that are socially stratified might make it challenging to include all of the affected resource users in decision making. A representative who doesn't actually work in the resource might join the group, while those with a greater understanding of the resource and its use might not consider it appropriate to attend, or if they attend, they might not be comfortable sharing their views and opinions. These are often people, for example, youth, women, or low caste members of the society. Some barriers to collaboration actually stem from within a group, so one quote unquote light group, instead of between groups that are involved in collaboration. Some of these barriers that have been identified by indigenous populations include tribal members who are not full-blooded, so this can lead to some contention within the group, clan disputes and jealousy, land disputes that might stem from the allotment period. These could have created shifts, schisms within the community. Tribal members that identify as practicing a more or less pure culture compared to others, so there can be a bit of one-upmanship. And members belonging to different religions. So for example, you might have members of a tribe, some of whom practice a traditional religion, and others might practice Christianity or one of the other world religions. We've already mentioned that some tribes have problems with infighting that stem from historical actions that elevated one group above the other. And this can be particularly bitter when these historical actions were the actions of outsiders. These rifts can prohibit all of those affected from participating in the collaborative effort, thereby weakening the support for any decisions arrived at and lessening the probability that there will be compliance. So there might be members who refuse to be in the same room together, for example, and who aren't going to participate in the collaborative effort. And without their input, the decision isn't arrived at by everyone. We'll look more at the cause of some of these rifts in the next slide. In many indigenous communities, infighting is a serious threat to collaboration. So let's take a look quickly at some of the common causes of infighting in indigenous communities. The cash economy has disrupted tribal cultures and created a hierarchy amongst communities and tribes, so that did not used to exist or was based on a different set of values. With a cash economy, some people can accumulate wealth indefinitely. This was not possible in a traditional culture where sedentary populations would grow for subsistence consumption and trade, but couldn't stockpile, and were mobile populations for whom mobility meant wealth, and therefore it could not be accumulated indefinitely. In many cultures, status was gained through generosity, so not by wealth accumulation, but by giving things away. We saw an example of this when we discussed how some pastoral populations will persist by often lending animals to others, so that when they themselves undergo a time of drought and lose some of their herds, they can then borrow from others. And so in those situations, your wealth was not measured by how much you had, but by how many debts you had to call back in a time of need. So this was status through generosity. Indigenous populations struggle with ways to become more egalitarian and less stratified while persisting within a global culture that uses the cash economy and those values of the cash economy and the ability to stockpile for oneself and to compete with others for that have persisted and infiltrated into local communities as well. Loss of or pollution of subsistence resources has also, in some cases, destroyed the traditional role of men in hunting cultures. So this is another source of infighting. This has resulted in social ills. In some communities, the boys and the men don't have a role to fulfill in society, and so they have no sense of purpose. Some may turn to drugs to fill the gap. Another source of infighting is federal social welfare systems. These often encourage women to leave their spouses in order to get more government financial support, and this can lead to fractious relationships between spouses and their respective clans. Finally, historical negotiations. So these would be the treaty negotiations or the negotiations that were made during the period of Indian reorganization when Indian governments were established. These historical negotiations, in many cases, elevated some clans over others, and this has left a legacy of infighting, anger, and resentment that may continue to this day. In Module 6, we defined involuntary minorities as those who became minorities through conquest or colonization. And we said that they sometimes highlight experiences of cultural conflict as a means of reinforcing their cultural identity. So again, involuntary minorities are different from voluntary minorities in that they did not choose to become a minority. They did not choose to move to an area where their numbers would be smaller and their identity would be marginalized. Colonization and conquest can yield lasting feelings of distrust and animosity, even several generations later. And these feelings can inhibit cooperation and collaboration. At a working conference in Alaska, Indigenous peoples from throughout the United States and Canada came together to discuss opportunities and barriers to collaboration. They identified the legacy of colonization as one obstacle that proves difficult for them to overcome. They felt that in order for collaborative efforts to be successful, it was necessary that they, as Indigenous people, recognize and overcome their suspicion of the government, quote unquote, doing something to them, as opposed to doing something with them. Although this sentiment might be stronger among those who have experienced colonization, similar sentiments are expressed by European-descended ranchers in the West and the government officials that collaborate with them. Quoted one agency member, "It's been a challenge overcoming mistrust, the suspicion of the government. We say, we're from the government and we're here to help you. And they say, yeah, right, get away." Other attitudes and perceptions that the conference members mentioned include superior attitudes held by Western scientists and government officials, the inherent distrust in the relationship based on its history. The Native peoples also stressed that it was key that they have a sense of ownership and power to affect change if they are to participate in a collaborative effort. So they didn't want to be invited to a collaborative effort that was not going to be truly collaborative, that was not going to truly take into account their perspectives, and that was not going to allow them to actually participate in the decision. So we've talked about some of the many benefits of collaboration and also some of the challenges to collaboration. And now we'll consider some of the criticisms of collaboration. And keep in mind that collaboration is not always the best solution. It is not always appropriate in every situation. So one of the criticisms of collaboration is that it produces very time-consuming solutions. And these solutions also tend to be, or can be, least common denominator solutions in that they are acceptable to all of the members of the group, but not really terrific for any of them. So I mentioned an example earlier that I've been involved with in the Western Mountains of Colorado, and this is a collaborative effort that doesn't involve indigenous groups per se, but ranchers, scientists, and recreationists, etc. And this provides a really great example of the time commitment that's required. So this group had regular evening meetings. They were often on a Friday or a Saturday night, and they might last for up to 3 hours. Since these areas are also very rural, members may spend an additional 2 hours in travel time to reach the meeting site. So that's 5 hours so far that somebody is spending of their own personal time to attend a meeting with people who don't think like them and have very different views. This time commitment is real, it's very real. And it's even more so when you consider the time it takes to build up trust amongst such disparate groups as ranchers, members of the oil and gas industry, environmentalists, birders, hikers, off-highway vehicle users, and adrenaline sports enthusiasts. So not only did they have these meetings that took 5 hours, they had many, many, many meetings in order to truly understand each other and build trust amongst the community. Many collaborative groups must meet for a few years or more before the members feel they can even trust each other and trust that their viewpoints will be respected and represented even when they aren't at the table. Until this level of trust is reached, collaborative groups will not be able to agree on decisions that gain the support of all members. Reaching decisions without the support of all of the members weakens the collaborative efforts, and those who feel their perspectives were not included will leave the group. Keep in mind that collaboration takes time and a whole heck of a lot of it. This is people's personal free time that they are not being paid for and which they could be spending with their friends and families in the pursuit of more enjoyable activities and pastimes. If people feel their views are not being recognized by the group, they're going to leave. They have all sorts of reasons to leave the group. Another criticism of collaborative decision-making is that it is unrepresentative of the broader public. In the United States, public lands belong to all citizens, but not all citizens and not all interested citizens will be able to participate in the collaborative effort. Some will simply be too far away, and others may not have quite enough interest in investing the effort. So for example, somebody from North Carolina may really feel a strong tie for a landscape in Colorado, but are they going to fly out here to participate in collaborative meetings that might occur very regularly and over the course of years? That's probably unlikely. For this reason, collaborative efforts are also critiqued as privileging local interests over national interests. Another critique of collaborative efforts is that they can also circumvent an established planning process and replace it with one, the collaborative effort, that was not approved for the resource in question and which may prevent the inclusion of key planning steps legally required for the resource in question. Finally, critics of the collaborative approach contend that the benefits of collaboration may have not been convincingly documented. Evaluation of collaboration is essential to demonstrate both the social and ecological, or on-the-ground outcomes of a collaborative approach. However, evaluation of collaboration has proved challenging due to the great variation in the goals, processes, and social ecological contexts of the different groups. So there's no one way to monitor and evaluate collaborative efforts to see that they are effective and are resulting in decisions that are good and lasting. So their benefits aren't really demonstrated. In many cases, their benefits are assumed, but they haven't been proven.